Welcome to another installment of Flashlights 101. This is the series where I cover some of the basic questions that you might have when you enter the world of flashlight enthusiasm. And today we're going to be talking about battery care in your flashlights, meaning how you should charge them, what storage charge is, should I leave them in the flashlight? If any of those questions sound good to you, then stay tuned. Welcome back to Shul Lights. All right, so I've got a bunch of knowledge I'm going to impart really rather quickly to you today here about lithium-ion batteries, which are the type of batteries that we use in flashlights. Now, this knowledge comes from years of using RC equipment, especially flight, because that uses lithium-ion and LiPo, which is actually kind of the same thing. And by the way, I've gotten debates about that, but I'll show you in a second here some of the chemistries you'll understand. And also, there's some great knowledge online from scientists that have contributed to a website called Battery University. And I'm not going to go to it for every claim I make, but I'll go to it often enough that you can tell that my claims are backed up with some science. All right, so here, let's just go through this video as quickly as we can. All right, so top question is, should I charge my batteries to full and leave them in the flashlight? Well, actually, that's several questions. One is about the charge voltage and storing it at like 4.2 volts. And then the second question is about leaving it in the flashlight and the effects on the spring or the flashlight itself. So let's break it down, okay? Now, to answer this question, I'm going to start with what lithium ion is. Turns out lithium ion is a suite of different chemistries. Suite like S-U-I-T-E, right? So let's take a look at Battery University here again, and you'll see that on this page that there's actually a bunch of chemistries across here. Let's go and make it a little bigger for display. And you'll see that we got lithium cobalt oxide, lithium manganese, all the way over to lithium iron phosphate, lithium nickel cobalt, aluminum oxide. Okay, but they all have some similarities, and these are all called lithium ion. Okay, so that's a little confusing because when you buy a lithium ion battery, it'll usually just say lithium ion and it'll say the nominal voltage on the side and probably the capacity. But the nominal voltage, it'll never say 4.2. It'll say 3.7 volts or 3.8 volts. And if you look at this chart, you can see that, let's say lithium manganese oxide is I'll highlight it, a 3.7 volt, and then it has in parentheses 3.8. Follow what's on the label because the label's not telling you the exact chemistry. It's just saying lithium ion. So follow what it says for nominal. Now, what do I do with that information of nominal 3.7? Well, that's where I go over to like a chart like this. And you can see that in this article's called Confusion with Voltages. So if you're talking about a lead acid battery in your car, and I don't think any enthusiast lights are using lead acid anymore, but they're going to have totally different specs than nickel-based, which is like nickel cadmium or nickel metal hydride. Lithium ion over here has its own different stats depending on what's going on. Now, as I said, you could go by the chemistry, but that's usually not listed. So you have to pretty much go by what's listed for the nominal cell voltage. So notice that if the side of the cell says 3.6 volts, right, you're still going to charge up to 4.2. No problem. If it says 3.7, you're still going to 4.2. Now, you treat all 3.7s and 3.6 nominal voltage as the same battery, okay? But now, if it says 3.8, this is colloquially called a lithium ion high capacity or lithium ion HC. At least that's what's called on my SkyRC charger and a couple other chargers I've seen. And again, I wish this was more standardized, but some people call it lithium high voltage, HV. Some people call it just lithium ion 4.35. But the point is that only the ones with nominal cell voltages of 3.8 should be charged to 4.35 volts. Chances are you're not going to see that with your flashlights. Let's back it up. Let's make it easy. Doesn't matter whether it says 3.6 or 3.7 for its nominal voltage. You're going to charge it to 4.2. Now, should it stay at 4.2? So here's another article about, this one's entitled, How to Prolong Lithium-Ion Based Batteries. And if you go down it and read it, there's a lot of stuff in here that affects the capacity, or let's say the life of the chemistry of lithium ion batteries. And the number one biggest one is depth of discharge. Depth of discharge would be going from 4.2 volts all the way down to like 2.5 volts at the very minimum, or 3.0 volts. And it turns out, I got another article for you. Turns out that, here's a little chart on Budget Light forums, and this is just one chart, but I've seen lots like this, that when you get down to about 3.1 volts down here, or 3.0 volts, you're basically empty. You can see the capacity here was less than 100 milliamps. So it turns out that whether your battery's at 3.0 or 2.9, 2.8, all the way down to 2.5, it's basically empty, okay? We're talking about tens of milliamps on a maybe 3,000 milliamp battery. So is 3.0 empty or is 2.5 empty? The answer is yes, it's empty. Consider it empty. Now, let's go back to depth of discharge. So on this chart, you're going to see that if you go from full to that empty, you're only going to get maybe 300 cycles. And you can see it says NMC. That's nickel, manganese, cobalt, I believe. It's one of the many lithium ion chemistries. Over here, this is lithium phosphate. Lithium phosphate is what's used in power walls. Lithium phosphate, as you can see, has more charges at similar usage. That's one of the reasons they use it in power walls, but it's not used in flashlights because of the fact that it's not 4.2 volts at its max. I think it's 3.85 at its max or something like that. It's nominal. I think it's 3.2 volts. You'd have to fact check me. Okay, it's just coming out of my memory. But anyways, not as much capacity and not as much voltage. So not as much lumens on most of the drivers we would use. They could be put in your light, by the way. They're the same size and they work, but you have to charge them differently. So don't throw them in a lithium ion charger if they're lithium phosphate. But back to this chart. So the point here is if you could charge, let's say in the 80 or 60% range, which means, let's say going to 4.1 volts and then dropping down to, let's say 3.4 volts and keeping it in that range, you could see that you're going to double the life or more. Now, there was another article that I can't find right now, but I actually found somewhere that it said that not only was depth of discharge an issue. Okay, hang on. Actually, I'm getting in the weeds here, but there's a bunch of things that degrade chemistry. So depth of discharge is one. Heat, let's go to this. Heat's another one. You can see that if you're between room temperature or freezing, right? Room temperature is about 20 degrees C. You can see that after a year, you should still have in the 90% of capacity, high 90s, right? But notice that when it gets really hot, after 1 year, you're only going to have about 75% of its capacity. So heat is another factor. And heat is not just like on the shelf or like in your car. So lithium ion battery stored in your car is a bad call. Not that they're going to necessarily blow up, but just that it's bad for the chemistry. So if you can store it somewhere insulated, like in your glove box or in a console with something wrapped around it, that is helpful. But back to heat. Charging. If you charge quickly, batteries heat up faster. So the quicker you charge, that also imparts heat, which degrades chemistry. And then lastly, the rate of charge. These are all factors in degrading the chemistry. Now, it's so complicated that let me just give you some tips. All right, here you go. One, if you go to 4.2 volts, charge your battery to full, feel free, but then use your battery within a couple days. Even getting it down to 4.1 is really helpful, okay? Once you get it close to 3.8 volts, 3.7 volts, and that's about halfway in capacity, you can store it there. And that's what I do. All these lights over here, all of them have batteries in them, and all of them are at about 3.7 to 3.8 volts. And if you go back to our capacity chart here, you'll see that 3.7 to 3.8 volts is around 50%. Okay, right there in the middle. By the way, no two charts agree on this. That was the exact lithium ion chemistry that this guy had tested, but it's around there, okay? And that's why 3.7 is called nominal. Nominal is 50%, and that's where you want to store your batteries. NASA did some tests and they found that lithium ion batteries stored at 50% state of charge, which is 3.7 volts, could last decades, like 10 to 20 years, okay, with near 90% capacity at the end of a decade. So that's a big deal, is keeping it in the middle there. Now, I understand why you wouldn't want to keep your battery all the time at 3.7 because one, you have less capacity, you have less runtime, but two, with less voltage, most drivers are going to give you less lumens. So I get why you would, charge up to 4.2 if you're going to use it, and you should, but just don't leave it at 4.2. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say if you're not going to use it within a few days, you should throw it on your charger and discharge it down to storage, which will be at 3.7 or so. Okay. That's storage charge. Done. Now let's talk about, and I also want to mention, just tacking something on. A few days? Yeah, like 3 days, something like that. If it's going to be more than 5 days, I'm definitely going to drop the 4.2 down to 3.7 volts, okay? All right, cool. Now, there's less damage if it's under 4.2. So the more it stays at 4.2, the higher it stays is the danger. So let's say your battery is at 4.1. Well, then maybe you can leave it for a week, okay? But then I would storage charge it if it was going to sit for months. But if it's like 3.9, whatever, a week, 2 weeks, no big deal. I mean, 3.9 is not that bad. And in fact, a lot of people recommend that you should take your 3.7 nominal voltage battery and store it intentionally at 3.8, which is higher than 3.7, obviously. But the reason why is because of discharge, which could be self-discharge rate, which is actually really slow. A self-discharge of lithium ion, if they're not connected to anything, is like, it'll drop like 0.1 volts in like well over a year. So it's not a big deal. However, if you aren't using insulating discs, if you're not putting something in between the spring and the battery when you store it on the shelf, most circuits, even when they're off, are going to kind of vampirically suck a little voltage out of it over time. So either mechanically lock out your light by unscrewing it, if that works. Some lights, that doesn't work and they're still connected, or put an insulating disc in between the battery, that kind of thing. An electronic lockout is not going to count because that's just disabling the button. The circuit is still on, okay? Now, let's talk about charging, okay? What's best practices for charging? Well, there's this thing called 1C. 1C means you take the capacity of the battery. Let's just call it a 3,000 milliamp battery. Actually, I think I have a Sony VTC5A in here. And I believe these were 2600s. 2600s right here, okay? We'll just call it 2600. I'm not sure if I'm right. So if this is 2600, 1C for this battery would be 2.6 amps. Okay, so you take the amperage capacity and just convert it to amperage charge. Okay, so 2,600 milliamps is 2.6 amps. So if I can charge this safely at 2.6 amps. Okay, now that's totally safe. If you want longevity, charge it at 0.5C. So if it's 2,600 milliamps, half it, charge it at 1.3 amps. Okay? When I'm not in a hurry, I always charge it the 0.5 just for health of the battery, but I do not worry about 1C. I know some people in the forums get all crazy about it, but trust me, in flight, we'll sometimes charge at 3C. There's a difference between what we'll do and what they recommend. But the fact of the matter is, anytime you're charging over 1C, you're doing damage to the chemistry. Batteries aren't that expensive. And, if you're charging in like a, fireproof bag or something in the field and you want to charge at 5C, go for it. I just know that every time you do that, you're taking a little capacity off. Okay. So again, best use, charge at 0.5C. That gets really important when you're charging things like 10 440s, the little AAA lithium ions, because those things are usually like, 300 milliamp? So you should be charging at 0.15 amps. Okay. Now here's another one. People don't talk a lot about this, but it's interesting. How there's charging stress when you charge it closer to 4.2 volts as cutoff. So if you have an intelligent charger like the SkyRC MC 3000, which I did a review on my channel, you can set that cutoff rate to, let's say, 4.1 volts. Now, 4.1 volts, and I'm looking over on my chart here, 4.1 volts is like 90% of the battery capacity. So you're not going to get as much battery capacity, and you'll lose a little bit of lumens, especially if you're doing a FET drive here. However, this is the thing. I saw a chart, which I can't locate at this moment. I posted to Reddit years ago about this, that you should get 500 charges out of a battery if you go to 4.2, go to max, right? And when 500 is termed, where, what's 500 charges? It means you're going to retain 80% of your capacity after 500 charges, okay? So their damage is being done. But it turned out that you could retain 80% charge after like 2,000 to 3,000 charges if you went to 4.1. Just because that last 0.1 volts, that last 10% of capacity is the most damaging to the chemistry. Now, I'm not advocating that you do that, but see, I kind of do it myself because I'll often throw a light in my pocket and I know I'm not going to use the entire battery. And I was at, storage charge on my shelf was at 3.8. So I'll throw it a charger, charge up to 4.1, throw it in my pocket. And then the heat is off, man. It's like, I don't care if I don't discharge it immediately. And if I do use it a little bit and I get it down to like 4.0 or 3.9, maybe I don't discharge it at all. Maybe I just throw it back in the drawer until next time I use it in a couple weeks. So, the closer you are to 3.7, the least it matters. So there's another tip. Okay, we're almost done now. That was a lot of info, right? Okay, here we go. I wanted to talk about springs, flashlights. Do I store my cells in there? Well, I said at the top of the video, I do. Every single one of those has a battery in it. Here's the thing about springs. If you look up about springs and what degrades them, they'll say corrosion, they'll say bad manufacture, they'll say heat, right? It's hard to find articles that really talk about whether compression is going to damage it. Like, keeping a battery just in the light all the time, on the spring here, just pushed. And the reason why is because that doesn't really affect it. I know. It seems like having it under tension would hurt springs, but it turns out that what fatigues that springs is the act of compressing it and uncompressing it, compressing it and uncompressing it. These flexing, the flexing I'm doing, that's damaging springs. But once you flex it one direction and keep it there, it's fine. Now, I remember an anecdote that was told to me by somebody that was in the military. They were at a warehouse, and they're doing inventory, and they found these crates, and this is like in the 90s, okay? In the 90s, they find these crates of Tommy gun ammo that was left over from World War II that was no longer even on the books. They just found these crates. And I guess the commanding officer that was in charge of it said, hey, we don't have an inventory of these. We got to get rid of them. So they were ordered to destroy all the magazines and the ammo. Well, they got these things. They took them out to the range and just had a field day. They found some Thompsons and just started shooting off magazine after magazine after magazine. Now, we're talking about magazines. They're stored for 50 years, with the spring compressed. They said they shot off thousands of these things and never had a single jam. And these things were stored for 50 years. So if that's not good evidence of the fact that staying compressed is not a problem, I don't know what is. And in fact, I would argue that if you store your batteries outside the light, it's actually probably more dangerous because of a couple reasons. One, when I say dangerous, I mean dangerous to the health of the spring and dangerous to the health of the battery. Because one, if it's stored out, then you got to put it back in, you got to put the cap back on, and you're adding a compression, right? So oddly enough, in your attempt to keep the spring better, you are recompressing every time you put it in and out, and that's actually counterintuitive. It's actually breaking down the spring a little bit. But again, don't sweat it. These springs have thousands of compressions in them. But here's the other thing. I know that people get worried about the pipe bomb effect of a battery inside a light, but the inverse of that is true as well. This thing is like a solid piece of metal around it. It's like really good protection. You could shoot these things, with like a 22 and you probably wouldn't rupture some of your titanium lights, right? Don't do that. Disclaimer, don't do that. But I'm just saying that the fact of the matter is that am I going to trust a plastic container more than the flashlight itself? No way. It's just store them in your light. Store them at nominal voltage on the shelf. And here's the last thing. Are you ready? Power outages, emergencies. I don't know about you, but I got a lot of flashlights. If they are all at nominal voltage, which is about 50%, that's not only better for the battery chemistry, I got a lot of light, man. I don't have to worry about when the power goes out. Okay, so I got half the charge in one of my lights, but guess what? They're all half charged, You see what I'm saying? So that is my advice, folks. My advice is, and just recap. So I'm going to put a little thing in the, table of contents here so you can just come to here. Here's recap, all right? Charge to 4.2, use it immediately. If you don't, within let's say 2 or 3 days, pull it down to 3.7 to 3.8 volts, depending on if you want that safety margin. 3.8 so they can settle down to 3.7 over time, okay? That's one tip. 2, charge it slowly. Charge it at about half the rate of the capacity. So if the battery is 1,000 milliamp hour, charge it at 0.5 amps. Okay? And 3, store it in the light. Okay? Somebody's going to probably have beef with that in the comment section, but I made myself clear, okay? There's reasons that I think it's just the best way to go. All right, guys. Hope that just demystified batteries for you. And at the end of the day, don't sweat it, man. You want to treat your batteries differently, do it. They're pretty inexpensive, right? Oh, here's a bonus tip at the very end. Are you ready? What makes batteries dangerous is the energy stored in them. So if you store a battery at, let's say, 3.5 or even 3.3 volts, there's so little energy in the battery that if it were to rupture, it's not going to explode. It's barely going to plume or anything. I've done tests. I've literally pierced all the layers in one of the LiPo bags at different voltages, with a nail, and had a catastrophic discharge. So, that thing about sending batteries in the mail, just have them at low voltage. Have them at 3.2 or 3.3 if you want to be safe. Anything under 3.6 is probably really decent. I don't know about that true. I don't know if that's true, 3.6, but I'm just saying that a battery at 4.2 can have if you pierce it, you will see how much energy comes out. But when you're down, it's much safer. Okay. So I hope that makes sense, guys. And now hopefully you can correlate some of the things you've been seeing with your phone or your smartwatch and how these things are now offering the ability to charge to 80% and cap it, because that makes your battery go from lasting like a year of daily use to like 3 to 4 years of daily use. Oops, dropped the light. All right, guys, on that note, I'm signing off, and I will see you in the next video.